Hello everyone and welcome to a brand new tutorial on how to create Minecraft in 2D. Now today we are going to continue our process and we are going to, like I said in the previous tutorial, that we are actually going to create some blocks and stuff like that, but before we do that we need the data. So we need everything in order for us to build our game before we can actually build the game. That makes sense to you? Yeah, I think so. So let's create the data for our game. Now we need a couple things. And basically this is needed for every game project you're ever going to create. So if this data is imported via URL or something, or this is like we do now statically loaded into your app, it works. So let's just create the game data.json file, and we can place some very general variables. For example, the block size. We need that variable everywhere in our game, and the render distance as well. You might think, hey, isn't that a customizable variable? Yeah, of course, but doesn't it need a default value, right? So now we have the chunk size, and it will have a width, let's say 25 blocks, and a height of 25 blocks, so that will be 25 multiplied by 25 is 625 blocks in one chunk. That is a lot, but it works, so let's keep it. Now let's create a new file as well for our block data. Yes, because every block will have data in it. For example, the dirt block will have, what data will it have? It might have a name, for example, like dirt, to be shown into the inventory, for example. It might also have an image, and that image can be found at, we have that right here, src, assets, textures, and then blocks, and then dirt.png. Okay, cool. Now we have some other blocks as well already into our game. For example, the grass block, and also our stone block as well. Now let's give those beautiful names. Stone here and grass here. You might change grass block as well, but okay, cool. So now we have static data, and we are going to load this into an object. Oh yeah, by the way, when you zoom in, it's very blurry still. You can do this. You can fix this easily by, say, image rendering and say pixelated. Now you do not want to do this if you want your game to be as smooth as possible. Usually you would do this with 3D games or games with really good shading, stuff like that. We are going to use shading, and that will not be applied to a pixelated image rendering. But since we are like using pixel art, actually, we do need the image to be pixelated. So let me npm run def, and we can see that the image is very pixelated right there. It's very sharp. Cool. Now let's continue. Let me close the console, and let's go to our game. Now we don't want to load in the game data into our game object, because the game object will be everything. So the container where the canvas element the container where the canvas element will be in, it will contain the Pixi application. It will contain the canvas itself, like this settings, stuff like that. It's kind of mess, I know. Let's comment this out first. But it will contain everything. So not essentially the game we want our players to play. We want our players to play the game in a world class. Right? Makes sense, because that's the actual game somehow. So let's create a world class right here. Say export class world, and then constructor, and yeah, I think that's it for now. And let's say this dot world equals new world. And now for debugging reasons, I want to console log this game object. Now it doesn't know where to find the world object, and it also doesn't know the variable yet. So let's import the world right there, and then also say public world class. Okay, great. So now this works. We have created the new world class, and if we can take a look, it is created. Now in this world class, we are going to import the data, but I wanted to import it as an object. I don't want to import it as JSON, because then we cannot use it as the JavaScript, like we cannot use it the JavaScript way. So we are going to create a subdirectory in our scripts folder, like a northern namespace called data, and we're going to have the game data in here, and it's not going to be JSON, sorry, it's going to be a TypeScript, and we are also going to create the block data, the TypeScript. And this will basically be the class where the data from every block will be. So the block data is actually the data from only one block. Okay, and the game data here will contain the game data for everything. So we have the constructor in here. Now what we can do is we can take a look at the game data JSON file right here, and we have the block size, which is not spelled correctly, and we have the render distance and the chunk size, right? So let me just copy this and just create those into properties right here, and make them all public, because we might want to be able to access it from outside this object. And the block size is a number, and the render distance is also a number, but the chunk size is an object containing the properties width, which is a number, and the property height, which is also a number. Now what we can do to very easily import those JSON files into our game data objects is by saying, let's go to the we can say import game data JSON from, and then go ahead and take a look at those game data JSON file and the block data JSON file. And yeah, let's import those variables really easily. So we can say let game data equals any, because JSON can be literally every object format, right? So instead of like the chunk size, we know that it contains the property width and height. We could say here, it contains a block size, a render distance, stuff like that. But that's not going to be really dynamic, right? We'll just say that it contains every possibility, right? Okay, so let me just say game data JSON right there. And what we can do now is we can say this.block size equals game data.block size. And we can do the same thing for the render distance as well as for the chunk size. And this works because we said that it has a width and height property, as it has in the game data.json file. Okay, cool. So now we can do sort of the same thing for our block data, but because every block data class will be like this part, we need to create a for loop. So let me go to the game data right here. We say for let key in block data, and then we just create the block data variable like we did with the game data. So block, and of course we need to say let key, and then we can just say block data key dot image equals the texture. So here we automatically configure like the texture. Does this make any sense? Because this is the game data object. I think this should be in the block data. So let's just apply this blocks. I'll show you that later. Say new block data, and then just pass in the block data key. Of course, we gotta say that. Okay. Now the block data. Did you mean block data? No. need to import it. Import block data from block data right there. Okay, cool. And then we gotta go to the constructor here, and we need to say the name, and it contains an image. So let's say block data, because we pass in the entire object, and the name is a string, and the image is a string as well. But now the problem with this is that if the image is not a texture, we need to delete this from the game data object. So yeah, we might do that later. Let's just say that this name is block data name, and same goes for the image, but the image is going to be a texture. So texture.from, and of course then we need to import the texture, let's say texture, from pixi.js. And of course we need to say public name and public image texture. Now the reason why I create this texture is because once we create multiple blocks, they all have the same block data, right? So a dirt block has the dirt texture, right? They do have a different X and Y position, which is the reason why we are going to create an extra block class, but they do have the same texture. So yeah, thanks to this we can just refer to this texture from the block data object instead of creating a new texture every time again. So this is not working because we need to say public blocks, and this is where it gets interesting. This is what I wanted to show you. We are going to say that blocks is an object, but it's more like an array where the keys are strings. Okay, so because we have, so it needs to be capitalized, right? Yes, because every block has its own data. I want to be able to easily access those data. So once we are in our world and we import that game data, so let me just say public game data, it is a game data. We can now say this game data is new game data. I want to be able to say like this is a game data dot blocks dot dirt, and then have everything about that dirt object. So let me test if this works. It looks fine. Let me go to the game, the world, the game data, the blocks, and we can see everything is in there. So this is importing game data into your game. Of course, this can be any sort of data, whatever you want. If you create another project with other things, you can do that. But this is like the easiest way for importing game data. So this is more like static things, and this is a little bit more dynamic because once I add a new block, it will be automatically added as an object as well, and we can easily access that object in our world. So that's it for today. I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Episode 3 is coming today as well, I think. And yeah, make sure to like, subscribe, and maybe comment on some ideas, on suggestions, stuff like that. Maybe follow my my Patreon page. And yeah, I'll see you guys later in the next episode. Bye, ciao.